Hey, John, how are you?
No, it's been good. We're actually in Vancouver. We played Calgary last night, and we're just finished sound check here in Vancouver.
Nice. Now, how do you prefer to do it? Do you like doing it fast paced like this, or do you like doing it with a couple days off in between?
Well, I mean, we do have some days off, but they're sort of spread out. There's not as many days off as, of course, we would all like. But the reality is, days off, they cost money, man, and so you have to sort of budget things out wisely.
Right, definitely. Where have you found has been the most responsive audience in Canada, and how do they compare to the audiences in the United States? Are there any noticeable differences?
To be honest with you, I don't think the responses with Ice Earth fans are pretty much the same globally. I mean, we just started our Canadian part. We're going to be doing Quebec City and Montreal and Toronto too on this, but later in the tour. So from memories, the Montreal shows are, they're always awesome. But I mean, we had a killer time in Edmonton and Calgary last night. The crowds were great. So it's kind of always, we're fortunate. We're a very fortunate band that we have a super loyal and passionate fan base, and they just kind of, react the same everywhere we go. I mean, of course you have some cities, even some of the best places in the world, if you're hitting it on a Monday or Tuesday night and it ends up being a late show for whatever reason, then sometimes the people can be a little more subdued because they have to work in the morning or whatever, but it's still awesome because they're just diehards, man.
Right. I heard Gene Simmons say something similar. It's like wherever you go, with Kiss fans, they're loyal because if you have that loyal fan base, it doesn't really matter where you are, they will show up in droves. So it's good that you guys have the same thing. I can tell that your fans, they're a very tight knit community. Let me ask you this. I hear so many metal and rock guys talking about, oh, the cell phones at rock concerts now, it's ruining them, it's taking over. How do you feel about that whole issue? Because for me, when I'm watching a show in the audience, it doesn't bother me to see people taking photos.
I don't really care. I just think it's kind of, I feel like it's stupid because they're not being in the moment. They're too worried about filming a band or whatever rather than enjoying the moment and the show. And so instead you're going to go home with you think you're doing it because, man, I want to relive this. But what you've done is you've sort of removed yourself for the moment because you're worried about filming. And then, you have usually a kind of a poor quality audio. I mean, I'm actually, I have to say, I'm really impressed with the new iPhone speakers, though, and it's amazing how they sound. But
That is true.
It's not my. I'm more of an old school guy, man. If I go to a show, and that's actually rare because I do this shit for a living. But if I do, then I'm gonna enjoy the show. I don't take photos. I don't dick around on my phone. I watch the show because I want to take it in. But that's me. It's a new generation, man. People do look at things a whole lot different than I do. So, the younger people do.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I guess, in a sense, how can you relive something you haven't lived the first time?
Exactly. And you're in the moment, the energy's flowing in the room and stuff. So for me, it's not like I'm not one of the guys that's just going to ban people from doing that, or I think that's going too far. I feel like it's a little bit sad. That's the way I look
Right.
at it. Like they're just really not engaged in what's happening in the moment, when they're doing that. I remember thinking that just a few years back when I saw Roger Waters doing that amazing production of The Wall. And there's all these people that are just holding up their cell phones, filming the whole time. And I'm like, do you realize that what's happening right now is the greatest show that's ever happened in the history of productions?
Yeah.
And you're staring at your fucking phone screen, worried about filming it instead of just taking in the amazingness. So, but that's the world we live in. When you have instant gratification and social media everywhere, and this entitlement kind of a attitude, it's just it's par for the course, I guess.
It is, yeah. It's part of the wiring, I think, of, something is only a legitimate memory or a noteworthy memory, rather, if it's documented on social media. People are sort of being wired that way. So it's interesting to see those two worlds collide. Let's go back to you in your early life. You were exposed to rock and roll really early, and you were actually a fan of it early as well. And it says here that your Kiss concert was the first one that you ever saw. Now, what tour was that, and what kind of impact did that have on you?
The first live show, it was 1979. It was the Dynasty Tour, and I was 11 years old, and it was a life-changing event for sure. Now, I'd been a Kiss fan for a lot of years before that. So that it was huge. And I bought Kiss Alive the day it came out, and I was 7 years old, at that point. And I'd already been listening to them, the first three records, with my older sister and her friends and stuff. So, it's been there a long time. But seeing them, I'm not going to say that Kiss had a huge musical impact on Iced Earth. I mean, I'm sure it has, but for just the push to want to do this, that was like, it was sort of in the 70s, man. It was an onslaught to the senses with things like Star Wars and Kiss. It was just, that Alice Cooper before Kiss, and that it was the era of shock. You know what I mean? Now there's people grow up with TV commercials that have these amazing budgets that you couldn't even fathom back in those days. So there was definitely a different sort of a hit, when you would see something like that. So a band like Kiss coming out with all the explosions and the makeup and the show, man, and it was all about the show, and it was just mind blowing for so many people. They have influenced so many bands. It's incredible.
Yeah, they certainly have. They've influenced me at a huge level. They were the first show that I ever saw as well. 1979,
Cool.
Peter Criss was having, he was having a lot of issues, apparently, with his drug use, and behind the scenes there were a lot of problems with Ace as well. Were there any cracks showing with either their playing or anything, or would you have even noticed that at 11 years old?
At 11 years old, I did not notice. My jaw was hanging open the whole time. However, pretty cool story is that a fan, thank you, man, a fan actually got me a bootleg of the Market Square Arena show that's in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I saw him. And years later, you know what I mean? Because they knew that was my first show, and it was just really bad sounding. So, you definitely, as you grow and you get into this and it's different, man. Because when you're a kid and even when you're not a kid, if you don't do this for a living and you don't really pay attention to the mountain of details that are going on, you can absolutely be fooled and have a great time.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's something I learned. As I interview more bands and I learn more about them, part of it, it's been like a pulling back the curtain on certain groups, and Kiss was one of them. It's like, it's like the Wizard of Oz. You think everything is great behind the scenes, and they have so much turmoil behind there. But I guess that's just part of it. Let me ask you. Go ahead.
When I heard that tape, it was like it was obvious after the fact, hindsight. But, then you go back and watch the bootlegs of when the band was young and hungry and kicking ass. And they were awesome, actually. There's some killer footage from the early 70s of them performing, and just, you could tell they were on a mission, man.
Yeah.
So,
They're one of the hungriest groups of all time.
They were in the early days, there's no doubt.
They certainly were. When you were 16 years old, you decided to move to Florida to start a metal group. That was one of the main motivations. Why Florida, and how did that unfold for you? Well,
that's a long story, but the journey to Florida was really a sort of we didn't have enough money to make it with the gasoline we could pay for to get to California, and we would have froze to death in New York.
Right.
So that wasn't an option, and we knew that there was some stuff bubbling. The guy started the band with Greg Seymour, many, many years ago. We were complete terrorists when we were kids, man, Beavis and Butthead all the way. And we split from home and started this thing, and his sister had lived down there. And, so we were hearing that there was a lot of bands that were playing out and stuff down there. And it was, it's a warm place. You can survive in Florida. And we didn't know what we were getting into, man. It was just, we're going, and we're going to make this shit happen. And it was really like the catalyst for me making that decision was a few events, one being the death of my a very, very dear friend, Bill Blackman, who I wrote Watching Over Me for, many years after that happened. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of me saying, you know what, I'm getting out of here. Because I was on a serious path of self-destruction. I was definitely a raging kid, and getting into a lot of trouble and stuff. And my grandfather at the time, he knew at the time this stuff was going on. He could tell I was headed down a difficult path. And he said, look, you just need to get on with your life because you're ready. You're as ready as you're going to be. And that was a pretty big thing to say to a 16-year-old kid. So that gave me some confidence to just go and make shit happen. He knew I was very determined. And even though I was a raging kid, I had a lot of focus and drive and something going on. So, those were the events that led to it. And, once I got down there, it took a couple years before we really got something happening. But in hindsight, if you think about really how fast it started, it's pretty amazing. And Greg and I actually just had lunch a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about that, how impatient we were when we left, and we wanted everything right now. But within a really short period of time, we found a group of guys to jam with, and the band was called Purgatory then. And, I designed that logo in graphic arts class in high school when I was a sophomore. In 1984 is when it officially started. And by the time, I'd say 86 or so is when we were really jamming and starting to do shows down in Tampa and everything. And then in 1988, I changed the name to Iced Earth because there was a band that existed already with a contract from Cleveland called Purgatory. So
okay, wow, very interesting. Now, a couple questions about that. You said that there was a good solid 2 years at least where things just weren't working out in Florida. You guys wanted everything right now. How do you combat that when things just aren't working out? And how many people are telling you, it's not going to work out? Maybe you should just look for a real job, or, the classic thing that everybody says. How do you combat that and actually get to your desired goal?
Well, I'm wired a little bit differently than a lot of people, man. When you tell me I can't do something, it makes me fight that much harder. So it wasn't even that it was a struggle because we were kids, didn't have any money, slept in abandoned houses, did, like the worst kinds of labor you could imagine for total shit money just to be able to eat and survive until we got a roof over our head. And, those were character building events that I would never take back as brutal as they were, because it got me prepared for, life really early, because it was sink or swim. But for me, it's always about how bad do you want something? You can always make up excuses because shit gets heavy and it gets hard as to why you're not going to make it. I mean, that's always an option. It's on the table. A lot of people use it, but it's just it was never an option for me. It was, it was sink or swim. We're going to do this. And I think the event of meeting the guys in Florida, Gene Adam and Bill Owen and Richard Bateman, and then, Greg and I, we were not the original guys in Purgatory, but the Purgatory that counted, because we jammed with a few guys, even in Indiana, and then we jammed with some other ones in Florida when we first got there, or after, a little while after. But when the five of us got together, it was tough, but it was like, we were on a mission, and it just happened. But I don't know, man. I've always been super driven, and the more people try to challenge me, the more I just fight back.
Well, that's great. And, I think I'm wired in a similar way, and it's cool talking to someone who's wired that way as well, because I can just feel the energy. I really understand what you're saying, so I'm glad it did work out that way. Speaking of Florida, I do have to ask your opinions on this. Of course, there was a terrible tragedy that we're all very sad about there recently. As a U.S. citizen, what are your thoughts on the plan about what should be done in the schools? Putting politics aside, as a U.S. citizen, what should they do about the schools and the safety?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I just don't trust that the population is being told the truth about almost anything. Mm-hmm. And as obviously as tragic as that is, there's always motivation. It's probably hard for people to understand outside of the United States, but the American people, the whole point of having the Second Amendment is not to protect yourselves against a robber or, to be able to go out and hunt. Those are just automatic fucking common sense. Mm-hmm. When they founded the country, everybody was hunting for food. You didn't go into Walmart and buy packaged bologna. You went out and killed your food and you ate it. That's how it worked. So that was automatic, just basic survival. But the whole point of it is to protect themselves against an out of control government. And so, that's the whole thing where it gets a little bit interesting. Like, do the powers that be really want to disarm the American people? And do they stage events and do horrific things in that mission? I think there is a certain element that would and probably have. So my whole feeling is like the knee-jerk reaction is everybody turn in your guns. And I'm like, yeah, no, fuck you. That's not going to happen. Not with me and not with millions of us, because we understand the situation a little bit better than that. So what they should do, it's not and this to me has nothing to do with left or right. This is just a constitutional. It's my right to defend myself. You know what I mean? As a human being, you take that right away, then I become a slave very quickly, possibly. And a lot of people just have become so domesticated that they don't think that's a possibility. But dude, it is. It wasn't that long ago that we had some major tyrants running the world, and I've been studying history my whole life, and I'm not one of those people who say, "Oh, that could never happen here," because everybody has said that before where it's happened. So,
exactly. That's the biggest mistake that people make. They say it's never going to happen to me, and then they're not prepared for when it does happen. It's a really interesting thing. People say they're trying to strip the rights away. I don't know what the answer is. I just know that I want people to be safe, not only in schools but everywhere they go. And people, when they hear you mention something,
here's a one solution for that, and it's going to sound extreme to a lot of people, is to teach everybody the responsibility of firearms and make sure that they have them.
Right.
And that sounds crazy, but that's actually the way that the United States was built, and largely big parts of the world. But it's just not discussed, man, and it's a big deal. If you're who's going to go into a school where people are trained and armed and do that kind of stuff?
Right.
Or anywhere for that matter. If you've got people that they understand their constitutional rights and they understand the responsibilities of firearms and are trained in that, the Swiss population's armed. They don't have this kind of shit going on. It's all about perspective, man, and trying to unlock from the boob tube and getting brainwashed about certain things, because that's obviously what they do. It's obvious to me anyway. I would prefer to learn from history and instead of talking heads and politicians with an agenda.
Right. That seems to be the more common sense approach. And it's like when you mention something like something potentially being staged, people are trained and they can think, whoa, you're mentioning, the government staging something. Now we're going into conspiracy territory, when the reality is, if you do study the history, the evidence actually is on your side, and it suggests that they have done this not once, but a few times before, at least, that have been documented. So it's interesting to see how people are, I don't want to say brainwashed, but definitely at least influenced by what they're being fed.
Well, and that's not understandable, because people want to believe and trust that the people that represent them in the halls of power have their best interests at heart. But most of the times they don't. And that's all I'm saying is I don't trust them. I might consider turning over my guns if all the cops do, the military and everybody. I might, but I even doubt that.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? It's just like, I'm just a freedom dude, man. And if you infringe on my right to speak and you take my ability to defend myself, then we're not talking about a free man anymore. And I realize we're on a very slippery slope and have been for a very, very long time. But that last step ain't going to happen, not with me, not with a lot of people I know.
Right. Very good insight. Thank you for sharing this with me. I appreciate it very much. I just want to ask you in closing, final question. Can you give me, when you think back to your number one fan interaction or story with a fan, what do you think of off the top of your head?
I can't really think of one specific thing, but I can tell you that probably the most gratifying thing is when you hear how a song like "Watching Over Me" has affected so many people, that have lost loved ones accidents or due to a disease or whatever it could be, whatever the circumstance is. I've seen so many people in the audience just crying their eyes out during that song. And then, I've talked to them obviously through the years, and it's just that's a really, really great sense of gratification when you realize how much of an impact your music has had and on people who have gone through some tough times. And that's just the real part of this. The rest of the stuff, there's a lot of fluff, and there's a lot of bullshit in the music business. And, most of it is actually, but when you get down to what's actually real about all of this, at least for me, it's about the songs. And if that resonates with the people, that's the best thing, man.
Awesome. That's such a great answer. Hey, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing some insight with us. And we hope you have a great, really safe tour, and you keep kicking ass out there, man. You guys are awesome.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. You take care of yourself.
You too. Bye-bye.